Welcome to Radio Horror tonight, this weekend before Halloween, as part of our back-to-back our horror erotic film interviews. We have director Bree Mills in the second half of our films tonight on the show with us. Thank you for coming on the show with us, Bree.
Thank you for having me.
We have this whole thing, we have a theme going this week with you back to back with the director of Embrace of the Vampire, which was like a 1995 horror kind of, not as, erotic as, let's say, your film, but I'm sure you're familiar with the film. The director of that came on just before you.
Nice, fantastic.
Yeah, Anna Gurusad. It's famous for Alicia Milano's first adult role outside of growing up. So I
Nice.
figured the two interviews back to back would definitely complement each other.
Cool. Well, I'm happy to play second fiddle to Alyssa Milano's first first adult starring role.
When I got the press release for your film, the first thing that came to mind was a movie from the 80s called Insemination. Have you ever heard of this horror movie?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, look up the poster for it. Your poster, it looks kind of similar to it. I was like, oh my God, I wonder if she drew inspiration from this like really obscure 80s horror movie, which has a woman kind of splayed out like yours, except for her head's upside down, and people are firing laser blasts between her legs.
Oh, Inseminoid.
Inseminoid.
Yeah,
I'm
there
sorry,
you
yes.
go.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's funny. I had never I've never heard of that before, but I love the poster. And
Yeah.
so I apparently we were thinking along the same lines.
Where you seem to be one of the more popular adult film directors because you're a woman. Why did you want to get into this entire field? Is it to change it around from the way men have made the adult industry to
Mhm.
be for them?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to establish is there's often a misperception about who is making adult films. So, there's a stereotype that it's a very male-dominated industry. The reality of certainly the 12 or so years that I've been producing content is that the majority of the most popular directors in the business are in fact women. We have adult filmmakers like Dana Vespoli, Aidan Starr, Casey Calvert, Caden Cross, who's won, the top awards a number of years, myself, Jackie St. James. So the list goes on and on. But that's often overlooked, right? Because there's just this perception, oh, it's guys making movies for the male gaze. So definitely, I'm one of many very talented female directors out there. I got into this business in kind of a unintended way. I was working in marketing and communications, and I ended up getting headhunted by an adult company about 15, 16 years ago. And I figured at the time, the global recession had just hit. So I'm like, well, I'm open-minded. Portis seems to be fairly recession proof. I'll give it a shot. I had never really certainly like watched online porn before. I kind of, my understanding of porn was like what you found in your under your brother's mattress, you know. So I went into it very naive, but I was super fascinated by just, I would say two things. I was fascinated by what motivated people not to watch porn, because even when I came in, like there were tube sites, so you could access porn really easily. So it's not like you had to pay for it if you wanted to watch it. So what interested me was like what motivated people to actually pay for subscriptions to porn sites, because that's the business that the company I joined was running these different sort of membership subscription sites for different adult brands and performers. And so that was interesting because that's very much like a fan culture, like not too unlike like diehard comic book fans or like any type of like fan counterculture that definitely exists within porn. People that buy subscriptions to their favorite porn studio, it's not just to watch porn. It's because they have, like a loyalty, an allegiance to a certain like fetish or director or type of performer. And so I just found it kind of interesting to study. And the other thing was that, I ended up getting into production because we, as a company, had decided to start producing some of our own content. We had been running other people's sites for a long time. And there was nobody in our company who was really, I mean, it was a bunch of kind of developers and tech geeks, right? So nobody who was actually in production. And I wasn't in production, but I raised my hand and I'm like, I'll give this a shot. And because I come from a background in marketing and communication, and I did a lot of, arts and theater and creative writing growing up, I kind of just threw myself into the world of porn. Stepped on a porn set for the first time, met a bunch of cool people here in LA who were aspiring, cinematographers and photographers and writers, and we just started creating content. And maybe because I had never like really watched much porn before, or like had certainly never like made porn before, the type of content I made was just really different. Um, and I've always been very interested in storytelling, so I just kind of leaned in on my interests, which are telling a good story and working with actors because of my, doing a lot of theater growing up. And it just turned out that especially for people who like story porn, so that's a whole kind of side of of that porn fan community. They really liked my stories, and that kind of like got me to where, the position that I'm at now. And I have no idea if it's because I'm a woman or not. Maybe just that I take a unique look on things. I call myself a lousy pornographer. So I think it's because I focus more on the story and the characters than really the sex, because to me that's kind of the payoff of a good story.
When you're working on the story, do you what are some cliches that you try to really avoid to make the story more important than just the like, the actors on screen, actors and actresses? I notice a lot of your films are um you definitely have like a theme going with them with darker, subject matter
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. Well, there's I kind of three main buckets you'll find my work. Most of the time, it's either like serious, sad, or shocking. And sometimes it's like a mix of the three. That's just the kind of stories that I'm interested in exploring. I really am interested in exploring human psychology and what motivates people behind their desires, behind their decisions. So that comes out in a lot of my work. I find within the world of adult, like fetishes themselves are fascinating. Why does somebody have, for example, like M Dom niche, the M Dom niche, sort of like male dominance as a niche. Okay. You can look at that on the high level and you can make a scenario that fits with that. Or you can really try to understand, for people who like that fetish, why do they like it? Like, what about that? Or, a very popular one is obviously all the like kind of family role play scenarios that exist, like the taboo scenarios. Like,
Hmm.
it's not about, oh, you're my stepmom, ha ha ha. That's not what is actually motivating that fetish. So I love to kind of really try to understand for the spectrum of different kinds of fantasies and fetishes that exist out there, like what are the underlying psychological things that are really like driving that person to be interested in that content, and then how can I serve that in the story? And I think the with a lot of especially the darker projects I've done, a lot of people want to explore kind of the shades of gray within situations. And I
Like the
like
turning.
to, yeah, well, the turning, yeah, yeah, that's a good example. Yeah. Well, the turning, that was one of my earlier movies. If I watched it again, I'd probably pick it apart. But what was cute about that one was it's a total allegory about homophobia. The whole idea that, oh, you're gonna catch the gay, right? Which is very rooted in real history and kind of kind of real issues. But I kind of manifested it into this obviously very fantastical situation where literally women are catching the gay, and and anybody watching it is going to be like, oh, this is a fun kind of campy horror movie. It's really like the undercurrent is really serious about, just the fact that for many people, many, many, many generations, people would literally assumed they were going to catch, catch homosexuality. So it did have a kind of a serious subtext, but and I always try to bring that into my projects too.
The uh when you're sorry, my cat was over here trying to get my attention. When you're when you're not making your material, your adult material, do you ever like want to branch out into something non-adult?
Yeah, it's something that I think about a lot. And I'll tell
Are
you
you
one
wor Oh,
of,
I'm sorry. There's two parts to that question.
yeah.
Are you also worried that the industry, Hollywood itself, is still not accepting of anything in your industry to be like, yeah, come over and direct an episode of Smallville or Supernatural, whatever. I
Yeah.
don't know if that would ever happen, but it definitely feels like there is some bridging sometimes. Like tonight that we're recording this, Joe Bob is on the air on Shudder, and his co-host is Darcy the Mail Girl,
Yeah.
former adult film star, and she's made that huge leap into like horror, final girl kind of scream queen.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting that you bring that up. I literally had a call with a mainstream producer friend of mine today, because one of the things I've done over the last 5 or so years of my career is for every major movie that I make, I start out making what is a mainstream, albeit independent film, but a mainstream film that could be released, on any mainstream platform or, YouTube or a place like Shudder or anything like that. And it has an uncensored version that we offer on adult time for our subscribers. But at its base, it's a meant to be a mainstream version that has almost like an X-rated director's cut. And so I've done that. I've had and not hacked up kind of soft core or like, you know, badly edited versions of pornos cut down into mainstream films, but really trying to start with the mainstream film that can get expanded into an X-rated version. And I've always had it in the back of my mind that there's something that can be done with this because, not only would it give us two places to offer our content in two different versions for those that want to watch the different versions, but it kind of proves the legitimacy of the work, right? Which is something that we're so often typecast as being like not actually good films, right? And so I've been on this kind of mission. But in a way, it's been kind of a hit, constantly hitting the ceiling because of the stereotypes that exist. So, I've had mainstream distributors basically say, "Hey, you got adult in your name, like we won't even look at you." Or, like let's take Birth, which again we have a completely R-rated version. You see less nudity in it than you would see in most Hollywood movies. But because the two actors who are the leads are well-known adult performers, people won't even pick up the screener because it's like, oh yeah, that's got porn actors in it. You should hire some, if you hire some, mainstream actors, then maybe we can talk. But it's like the word porn is an instant sort of scarlet letter on anything we try to show, even when it literally is just an independent movie. So it's been something that has been a point of frustration for me for years because I feel like there's such talent within our community. And I absolutely agree, different versions of the project for different audiences. Anything explicit should be behind a paywall. It should only be available to people who are of age and subscribing. But we can still show a movie that is, again, it's still like an R-rated movie. It still should be something that a certain age and above should watch. But it's like a total, double standard that we do get shut out of any consideration. So I was on the phone with a producer friend, and he was like, "Well, you should just make a movie. Just like make a mainstream movie. Don't even think about the X-rated version. Just make a movie, and that's what you need to do." But I feel there is a bridging of the two worlds that's interesting. A lot of people watch Hollywood movies and they see sex scenes and they're like, "Oh, I just wish I could see a little more." Well, in our movies, you would have the option to, right? Like you could just stick with, what you get. But if you want to see the extended version and you're of age, you can. And I think that, there's no reason why that shouldn't exist as an option. It's just sort of society that's condemning that it shouldn't. But the one genre that I feel there is such potential crossover for is the horror genre. I mean, horror and
Yes.
adult have always been quite open to each other. Again, it's two communities of like fans.
Right.
And
Right. And
so
I've had
yeah,
like Joanna Angel on a couple
yeah,
times to do, talk about like one was like the most bonkers thing ever, but it fit so well. It was a Friday the 13th parody. They even had like Jason, just the guy in a Jason mask. And they made a point of being like there's gonna be 13 sex scenes and 13 kills. And
yeah.
sure enough, it was the couple, the couples F around. We're gonna broadcast this, so I gotta be careful. The couples F
Mhm.
around, then Jason kills them. Then the couple F's around, then Jason kills them. And it just repeats itself through the next hour.
Yeah.
Just like this is the most bonkers, easiest way to make both an adult film and also a horror movie if you cut out certain scenes in the thing. And I
Yeah.
remember I was working at Blockbuster Video many, 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 many years ago when Pirates came out, and they had an R-rated version that we rented, which
Yeah.
was very funny.
Yeah.
And I have the X-rated version on DVD, and it's just so funny that they put out this actual R-rated version, which just kind
Yeah.
of looks like if you remember the Red Shoe Diaries, those
Oh
old
yeah, yeah,
films.
yeah. It's that. Well, that's the thing, right? Like as a filmmaker, you know, if you're making a movie, and there's so many movies that are made that include sex and sexuality as subject matter or scenes within their movies, and there's just a certain cut point, right? Like the couple going to kiss, and you see them kiss for a second, and then it drifts off to the next scene. Like there's just always a point for an R cut. And making a movie, there's no reason, especially if I'm trying to, really focus on making a good story, there's no reason that I can't pre-plan, okay, this is where the R-rated version is going to cut, and this is where the X-rated version is going to carry on a little longer. So it's as an adult filmmaker, it's not difficult to make two legitimate, freestanding versions. But with one of the things that in the horror genre I'm very eager to do in the next year, and I'm angling for it right now, is we had done this would have been back in 2020. We did a 4 episode limited release of a horror porn series called Under the Bed. And it was, each episode was sort of a vignette story. So, you know, all encapsulated, and they tackled kind of different, we had a different filmmaker for each one, and they tackled different, different subjects, and they were fantastic. They like, just because again we put the same quality into, like, we want to tell a good story within the horror genre that just so happens to actually include sex in it. And that's a series that I really want to resurrect in 2025 as a full season, because again, I think, who more likely to want to tune in to a good, like, especially if we make a really good quality set of horror shorts that also include sex scenes, but the horror fan community, because they've always sex and horror, like it's like they're a perfect mix, right? In terms of like all the classic horror movies have at least somebody getting off during during a sex scene. So yeah, that's kind of part of my vision for the next year, is to make a successful, like, recurring horror series within the adult landscape.
Talking about birth, which is the whole reason you came on, not just
Yeah.
your point of view, but that's a lot more fascinating to me as a filmmaker, especially in a genre that I'm not overly familiar with. How long did it take to put this together? And it's definitely shot from the scenes I saw in the trailer in a way that reminds me of a lot of like creepy birthing films, not like Rosemary's Baby per se, because everyone's going to go to that one, but there have been others out there. Like Adam Green made one. I think it's called Graced, and it's a
Hmm.
woman. And I don't know if you've heard of this film. It is diabolically creepy and definitely worth checking out.
Hmm.
It stars one of the actresses that was in Cabin Fever, which, speaking of sex and porn, sex and horror,
Yeah.
uh, Jordan Ladd, that's who it is. Jordan Ladd is the woman in it. Talk about birth and like where this came along, and like where did you come up with the idea for this? Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if you have kids of your own or just the horror of birth. I've been there for my sons. So that was the one and only I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, I would say I'll be happy to actually send you a copy of the R-rated version afterwards, so you can watch the whole movie and
Yeah.
take it. So Birth was about a year, little under a year in the making. Um, a lot of my a lot of my projects come from a place of truth as their origin. So I am a parent. I have two kids, and this movie was really kind of exploring, some circumstances surrounding the birth of my first child, but obviously quite heavily distorted. So I don't want anybody to go out and see it and then think that that's what happened to me, because it's not exactly true. But I will say, like, everything comes with me, like everything is comes from, I use movies to try to, work stuff out. So I was definitely starting by working something out with this. I knew the story I wanted to tell. The
Can
first
I
thing
ask
I
a question real quick?
Yeah.
Can I
Yeah, for
interrupt you
sure.
real quick? I definitely like to get into like the mind of the filmmaker. Would you mind going into a little bit more about what you were trying to work out, or is that way too
Yeah,
personal?
no, I'm happy to do that. So, I my first daughter was born in the wake of a divorce. So, during the course of the pregnancy, my ex and I, were kind of on the verge of splitting. It was not a somewhat dysfunctional time. Luckily, nearly a decade later, everybody's very civil and harmonious, and my daughter's got multiple loving parents, but it was a tumultuous time.
Yeah,
and
that's good. You don't hear that
and
all the time, but that's good.
and in the wake of the divorce, and the decision that my daughter would live with me full time, obviously had a lot of impact on my ex. And there's been, over the last decade, there's been a lot of kind of like healing and coming to terms with the fact that, that decision sent me on a journey in my life, which has been, very overwhelmingly positive and abundant and all this stuff. And for my ex, it's been a real challenge. And so, kind of carrying the accountability of knowing that decisions that were taken not benefited myself, benefited, my daughter, but also had a real impact on somebody else. And that's something that I always explore within my life and within films, is the sort of duality of decisions, right? Like, what's good for you might not be good for somebody else. So are you being, should you feel guilty? Should you not feel guilty? And I wanted, in very kind of candid conversations with my ex all these years later, she shared with me a kind of a conspiracy story that at the time of that tumultuous year, friends of hers and people within her circle were saying about me, that basically was, in a sense, the plot of Birth. So I was, and as a evil writer, I listened to this and I got off the phone and I thought, my God, that would be a really good story, even though it was a kind of a conspiracy theory about myself. So that kind of manifested into, well, how do I explore this sort of personal weight I've carried all these years, and my role within the dissolution of this one dynamic and the creation of another? What better way to do it than through a good psychological body horror? And so that was sort of like the initial inspiration for the movie. But I would say the movie would not have been made without kind of two other key ingredients coming into place. Like, I knew I was going to tackle this, and that it was, coming from, pretty deeply personal place. Um, but I couldn't do it without a really like solid partner in the special effects makeup realm, right? Like, I wanted to show the story of a woman throughout the entire course of her pregnancy, and I wanted her to be very, by all accounts, in hyperrealism, very, very pregnant during the second and the third trimester of it. Um, and so I started to coincidentally work with a mostly mainstream artist who happened to be friends with, my co-producers in this movie, and we all kind of got together. And as soon as I saw his work, I said to him, "Can you do bellies?" And he said, yeah. And then I knew, okay, I could make it with the level of kind of visceral realism that I wanted to. Because part of the real body horror, especially doing a story about pregnancy, a not so happy story about pregnancy in porn, is the fact that, a lot of people are not used to seeing that. And that makes you uncomfortable, seeing somebody in these very intimate, vulnerable situations, fully hyper realistically pregnant, is something that, people are going to have an emotional response to. So I knew it had to be very real. And so he was a key ingredient. And then Casey Calvert, who's our lead actress for it, a very, a friend of mine, someone who I've worked with for many years in many different capacities, also an award-winning adult filmmaker herself. I knew she was the right person for it, and if she wasn't going to be part of it, it probably would not have been greenlit. So like having her willing to take on the challenge, having the right prosthetics artist, and then also locking into a personal story that I wanted to tell were kind of the three main things that gave birth to giving birth.
When you're not making adult films, what are you like? What are you into for regular films? You must be a
Yeah.
horror fan yourself, obviously, since you continue picking and turning stories of eroticism into horror in different ways or body horror. What horror
Yeah.
movies are you like a big fan of?
Oh, well, so I mean, I definitely I would say overall I have like a pretty eclectic taste when it comes to film. I'm just a big cinephile, so like I have watched a ton of movies throughout my life and love film and love, good narrative television. But horror movies always kind of pop up. So for me, it's if I were to think about the movies that most influenced me, uh, the probably the number one film, it's not quite a horror, but it's a thriller, would be Michael Mann's Manhunter, which was like the original Hannibal Lecter film in the 80s. That's a movie that I always find super inspiring. Um, I have been The Thing is one of my favorite movies because it's just a great film about paranoia.
Hmm.
Similarly, Alien, Ridley Scott's original Alien,
What
super
did you think of
inspiring.
Romulus?
You know what? I just watched it. I thought
Okay.
it was all right. It wasn't bad. It's nice to see Ridley Scott returning to the franchise because I think Alien is such a masterpiece. Like, Alien would be in my top 10 movies I could rewatch on a regular basis throughout the rest of my life. It's
And
just a,
talk about sex and
yeah.
horror, Alien. I mean, H.R. Giger's artwork is
Oh,
just
yeah. No, I mean, 100%. 100%.
it's
And
mind blowing.
it just also, I mean, again, I could nerd out, but just the
No,
way
please do.
that,
You got a few more
yeah,
minutes. Please nerd out.
yeah, no, well, the fact that he handheld most of that cinema, like he himself handheld most of the shots in Alien, like it just probably some of the best handheld cinematography I can think of. Just a great example. Like I'm always inspired when I watch a movie and I'm like, oh, I could do that. Not that I could, but like the fact that they didn't have a ton of bells and whistles to be able to pull off what they did. Like so much was left to what imagine versus what you see. And, just a great slow burn first half up until like a really chaotic second half. And I just I take a lot of inspiration from Alien. I like Prometheus. I know not everybody does, but like I really enjoyed that. I even enjoy parts of Alien 3, which I know, David Fincher would burn, but the opening shots of Alien 3 are like, I think about that all the time. Like if I want to, I'm gonna rip that off sometime. Like just the way he encapsulated the backstory and those like 10, 12 opening shots. Um, but
And
yeah,
see,
so
and there's the
I
thing.
yeah,
And there's the thing you bring up. Nobody has made a really good horror adult film like with the amount of special effects you see in Alien. I
yeah,
mean, Pirates is okay, it's a lot of CGI, but
yeah.
I have never seen like that level of caliber. I'm not saying like a monster should be like going around like screwing and impregnating things and whatever, like an alien. It can go kind of
Oh, I
crazy,
think
but
that sounds like a
you
great
see
idea.
Okay, no, maybe I'm completely wrong. Because I've seen like parodies of like The Exorcist, and I was like, oh God, what am I watching?
Yeah. No, but like I'm quite inspired, and like again, I go through phases, right? Like what A24 is doing, what Neon is doing. I'm super inspired by like modern intellectual horror that's been coming out the last few years, like Osgood Perkins and the
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Like
Long,
Heretic comes out next week.
yeah, yeah. Long Legs is not a perfect film, but man, it's got some great shots.
Have you
And
seen
when you, yeah.
did you see Late Night with the Devil yet?
Yes, another perfect example of just super smart, clever, and you can tell like what I love about modern horror as a genre is you can still see like the people making those movies haven't had their souls zapped dry yet, right? Like they're still thinking about cool cinematography, like all the found footage stuff of Late Night with the Devil or Long Legs. I loved how almost every single shot was framed with a ton of negative space. So you could be watching the protagonist in sitting at a desk or something, and you could see all the way down the hall behind her and all the way out the back window. And that was clearly intentional so that you're always on edge because you're always waiting to see what's going to like peek out in the background. And I just like, to me, that degree of people having fun with how they can use the mise en scène to like evoke a response like that I find just so inspiring. So I love that kinds of kindness. That's not a horror movie, but that was a brilliant movie. There's just a bunch of a bunch of stuff that I draw inspiration from, but I always find it motivating to watch a bunch of stuff just almost like you're like eating snacks, like what's gonna like inspire me to like go out and try to do my best work next. So being a fan yourself is like a big part of how we are at Adult Time in general. Like we always say that's one of our values. At the end of the day, we're making movies with sex in it because we love sex and we love making movies.
That's good. That's fantastic. Well, Bree, thank you so much for coming on the show. Talk a lot about your, your insights as a filmmaker, as much as your career in the adult film industry. I think one is just as equally as important as the other, just because you definitely have an incredibly creative mind, and it comes across incredibly intelligent with the way everything you said. So, thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
can, I really do appreciate you coming on the show. Um, why don't you plug where people can find you online if you're on any social medias that they want
Yeah.
to send you accolades for birth?
Awesome. Well, if you want to find me online, you can find me at the Bree Mills on Instagram and X. I am also on TikTok at Corn Director, so you can check me out there. And then the best place to find all of my work is on adulttime.com. You can check it out. It's completely safe before the paywall. We only want people to join if you're 18 plus. But if you are, you can come check out all of our work on adulttime.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bree. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and also have a happy Halloween.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm heading out to Halloween horror nights here at Universal Studios right after this call. So,
What's the theme this year?
oh, well, they do a bunch of mazes. I think they've got, Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire, and they got a bunch of stuff. It's a
That's
lot. It's
awesome.
like hundreds and hundreds of scare actors. So I'm gonna go get scared.
Do you think you'll get recognized being like, "Hey, don't you didn't you make that a lesbian like horror series?"
I get Regan. My wife is also a former performer, so like I get if she doesn't get recognized somewhere, I will. And it's very random. Most of the time, no. Occasionally, yes. And it's always in the strangest of places. So
Is that like the drive-through McDonald's going, "Hey, I watched your..."
yeah, yeah, pretty much. It's stuff like that. At the airport, walking down the street. So it happens. But luckily, I'm mostly anonymous.